A system is, at its core, a tool. It's designed to produce a desired outcome. But what happens when the very tool we designed to achieve a goal ends up working against it? This is an exploration of how systems, through their own internal logic, can come to reward the very behaviors they were meant to prevent.
You know, we tend to operate on a simple assumption. Incentives work. If you reward a behavior, you'll get more of it. And yet, across countless different domains, we see this assumption break down. Systems that are designed with very clear rewards often produce unintended and sometimes even destructive consequences. So the real question isn't if this happens, but why.
Well, the failure really begins with a misunderstanding of what is actually being rewarded. We expect the system to reward the intended effort, the hard work, the creativity, the genuine contribution. But in reality, a system doesn't reward effort. It rewards the successful optimization of the metric that's being used to grant the reward. And that right there, that's the critical failure point. To really understand this dynamic, we first have to examine the paradox of motivation that exists within a system and see how introducing an external force can completely alter its internal state. Okay, so at its most fundamental level, a system is just a structure for aligning the behavior of its participants, let's call them agents, with some kind of collective goal. It achieves this by creating a set of rules and incentives that make certain actions more likely than others. Now, the agents inside any system, they start with their own internal drives. We call this intrinsic motivation. It's the satisfaction or the interest or the sense of purpose an agent gets from performing an activity for its own sake. It's completely self-generated and self-sustaining. But then, the system introduces an external force. This is extrinsic motivation, a reward, like a payment or a prize, specifically designed to encourage a desired action. It comes from outside the agent and is controlled entirely by the system. So initially, we can visualize an agent's behavior as being powered by this internal engine. Their intrinsic motivation is the primary driver here, turning the gears of action based purely on internal satisfaction. But when that external incentive is applied, it doesn't just add to the motivation that's already there. It can actually interfere with and displace that internal mechanism. This phenomenon is known as motivation crowding. The external force begins to replace the internal one, causing that internal gear to shrink. The agent's reasoning shifts from, I do this because it's interesting, to, I do this because I am paid to. Now, this crowding effect is triggered by a second and maybe more fundamental flaw: the disconnect between what a system truly wants to achieve and what it's actually capable of measuring. You see, every system is built to achieve a true goal. This is the intended outcome, which is often complex, abstract, and qualitative. Think of concepts like better education, improved safety, or quality craftsmanship. These things are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to measure directly. So, in order to operate, the system has to translate this complex goal into something simple it can track. It selects a measured proxy, a quantifiable metric that serves as a stand-in for the true goal. This could be something like test scores, or response times, or the number of units produced. It's chosen specifically because it's easy to measure. But the measured proxy is never the same as the true goal. It's just a simplified abstraction that captures only one small, measurable dimension of a much larger, more complex objective. The vast majority of the true goal remains completely unmeasured. This gap between the goal and the proxy creates a critical vulnerability, which is articulated in the principle we now know as Goodhart's law. It states that once a metric is chosen as the target for a reward, its relationship to the original goal is broken. It stops being a simple indicator. It becomes a target for optimization. And what happens then? Well, rational agents adapt. Their effort, which was once dispersed across the entire true goal, now converges on that one narrow rewarded proxy. The system has successfully incentivized a behavior, all right, but it has incentivized the wrong one. Effort gets diverted away from all the unmeasured parts of the goal and toward the one part that yields a reward. And this shift in focus isn't just a static event. It actually kicks off a corrosive feedback loop that degrades the system's performance over time, pushing it further and further away from its original purpose. One such feedback loop is called the ratchet effect. Agents quickly learn that today's high performance on a metric will just become tomorrow's baseline expectation. And this creates a powerful incentive to conceal their true capabilities, to perform just well enough to get the reward, but not so well that the target becomes even harder to reach in the future. So this leads to a pretty predictable sequence of decay. First, the system selects an incomplete proxy. Then, agents, acting rationally, adapt their behavior to maximize their rewards based on that proxy. This optimization narrows their focus exclusively to gaming the metric, and as a result, the unmeasured and now ignored aspects of the true goal get undermined. The final state is what we call a perverse outcome. The system's incentive structure is now perfectly calibrated to produce an effect that is the exact opposite of its original intent. So it isn't just failing to achieve its goal, it is now actively working against it. Now, it's crucial to understand that this failure is not the fault of malicious agents or incompetent designers. It's what we call an emergent property of the system's architecture. It is the logical, predictable outcome of rational actors responding to the incentives presented by a flawed structure. This entire process reveals a general principle about the nature of complex systems and what happens when we try to manage them. The act of selecting a metric and attaching a reward to it is not a passive observation. It is an active intervention that fundamentally alters the system it's intended to measure. The system begins to reshape itself around the measurement, often in ways the designers never anticipated.
And so, ultimately, a system's outcome is not determined by the good intentions of its creators. It is dictated by its structure. That gap between the complex true goal and the simple measured proxy, that is the structural flaw that determines the final result.
Understanding this principle, that structure dictates function, is the first step toward analyzing system failure. If a system reliably produces perverse outcomes, this is not an accident. It's a reflection of its underlying design. The outcome, in the end, reveals the true nature of the system.